Now that you have a better idea what we're going to be accomplishing in this course, what material we're going to be covering in this course, and what skills we're going to learn, let's turn back to the moral problem that we started with last week that you looked at and you wrote something about. Very interesting problem posed by a philosopher, Philippa Foot. In fact, there's a reading that you have by Judith Jarvis Thompson about these examples. And what's very interesting about the example is that it is a thought experiment to try to see what you think is the correct answer in a certain moral dilemma. And we've heard one of the moral dilemmas, and you guys have already weighed in on what you thought the correct answer was. But what's interesting about it is there are actually two variations of this example that Sandel talks about, and philosophers in general talk about. And they seem to lead us in very different directions about what the right thing to do is and why that's the right thing to do. So let's jump in, and I want to get an understanding of what we do in ethics. The best way to do it is to really jump in and look at it. So let's now turn back to the example and Professor Sandel and see how he explains it. And then as the video goes along, I'm going to stop it and we're going to actually talk about something. We're going to talk about it through discussion forums, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to think about it, maybe write down your answers, jot it down, and later you'll record them for me. And here we go with Professor Sandel explaining the example to us and asking us some questions, and we're going to participate. Let's see what the Harvard students think. We'll see what you guys think as well.
This is a course about justice, and we begin with a story. Suppose you're the driver of a trolley car, and your trolley car is hurtling down the track at 60 miles an hour. And at the end of the track, you notice 5 workers working on the track. You try to stop, but you can't. Your brakes don't work. You feel desperate because you know that if you crash into these 5 workers, they will all die. Let's assume you know that for sure. And so you feel helpless until you notice that there is, off to the right, a side track. And at the end of that track, there's one worker working on the track. Your steering wheel works, so you can turn the trolley car, if you want to, onto the side track, killing the one, but sparing the 5. Here's our first question. What's the right thing to do? What would you do?
Okay. Well, you guys have answered that question. However, notice one thing that just transpired. How many questions did Professor Sandel say he was going to pose? When we're thinking about philosophy and ethics, but in philosophy in general, we have to be very careful in our use of language. And let's see what's just transpired. Professor Sandel said, I'm going to ask you one question. And then he proceeds to say, what's the right thing to do? And immediately thereafter he says, what would you do? And I want you guys to think about it. In fact, I want you to try to write some comments about it. I'm going to ask you the following question. Are these really the same question? Or are they two different questions? If they're two different questions, you ought to be able to tell me how the answers to the two would be different. So let's stop right here, go into the discussion forum, and answer this particular question.